Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for joining us This Week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network, website thisweekinamerica.us. As promised on the program tonight, Diane DiResta. Diane is author of the new book, Revised Edition, Knockout Presentations, How to Deliver Your Message with Power, Punch, and Pizzazz. Diane, welcome to This Week in America. Great to have you with us.
It's great to be here, Rick. Thanks.
You know, when you think about it, people may go, well, I don't make presentations. Well, yes, you do. When you're talking to the kids about cleaning the room and taking out the trash, when you think about it, that's a presentation. Basically, everyday life is filled with presentations.
I love you, Rick.
Thank you.
You are speaking my language exactly, because one of the things I say all the time is life is a presentation. And the biggest myth and the thing that really riles me is when somebody tells me, I'm not a public speaker. Well, yes, you are. The problem is people think public speaking is standing at a podium in front of 100 people. But, as you said, if you're trying to convince your kids to do something, if you're leaving a voicemail, if you have to give updates at a meeting, all of that is public speaking. And we're always on stage.
Well, it's interesting. You bring up voicemail, and I'm reading the section in the book discussing voicemail, and there's so many things that are irritating about voicemail. I will get voicemails all the time where sometimes they don't have the number, and it's like, okay, I've got to go back and try to find the number in my notes here. Or they go through it so quickly and they don't repeat it that you play them, the message back 5 times and you still can't write it down. What should we do in doing a voicemail? We take it for granted. It seems very informal, but again, it's a presentation. It's us saying something to this person and trying to do it with some professionalism.
Well, that's why I did a whole section on leaving a voicemail in the special situation section of the book, because it is a form of presentation. One of the things, just as you're finding, that's annoying is when people don't take the time to prepare. So the first thing is changing your mindset. And I tell people that a voicemail is a presentation, and the first thing is you have to prepare for it. The way to prepare is by jotting down a couple of bullets so that you know that you want to make these points. You don't do stream of consciousness while you're on the phone. Secondly, you want to take your time. I literally had to rewind the tape 5 times to understand someone's message. And the only reason I did it is they were a client of mine. People are not going to take the time. So speak slowly and pause between the numbers. 212-481-8484. Give people time to write. Another thing that's important is when you're saying your name, if you have a long or difficult sounding name, it makes sense to spell it. If you speed through, people will not know who it is, and it's so embarrassing to call someone back and not know who you're talking to.
Well, I've done that one time with a guest, and it's like, I have no idea who this is. So you basically call and try to be diplomatic and polite. It's like, who is this? And then you realize, well, okay, I now I know who it is. I wish you would have left that on the message.
Exactly. And the other mistake is making love to the voicemail machine, because people don't understand the purpose of a voicemail is to get someone to call you back or to leave a very brief message, such as, I'll meet you at 4. But I had one friend who had to hang up and call me 3 times because the tape ran out, and then she yelled at me because my tape was too short. That is not what voicemail is for.
Well, I've got to admit, and I'm reading that, and it's like, yeah, Rick, you really need to tighten that up, because I will do that, and I'm used to talking in like half-hour segments. So all of a sudden, you're talking, and you say, don't have a conversation with the answering machine, and that's what I'm doing. And the voice is coming on and saying, I'm sorry, but your 15 minutes to leave your message are gone, and you've got to call back.
Right.
So keep it, basically the KISS principle as you're talking about. Just
Absolutely.
Keep it simple.
Keep it short and simple. And I actually was hired one year by a manager who told me his direct report left him voicemails of 1.5 minutes, and he said, Diane, I have to keep fast-forwarding to get to the message. So I literally had to work on that with him, preparing, writing the bullets, and timing it so he could get to 15 to 30 seconds.
The book is Knockout Presentations, How to Deliver Your Message with Power, Punch, and Pizzazz. Diane DiResta is with us on the program today. Her website is very simple, diresta.com. That's DIRESTA.com. You're listening to This Week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network. Our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And you can log on to our website and then link up and get all the information on Diane's book. Let's talk about the first thing. When you're talking about making a presentation, I'll call it a formal presentation, not just family and people that you work with, but you're presenting in front of others. Everybody says, how do you overcome the fear? And I guess the answer to that pretty much is even professional speakers never really overcome that nervousness, do they, before they make their presentation?
Exactly. And what I tell people to do is to embrace the fear. You don't ever want to be totally nerve-free, because that nervousness is simply adrenaline, and that adrenaline is what's getting you ready for a performance, and that's what makes you dynamic. But what you do want to make sure you do is to channel it so that you are dynamic and it's not working against you. But to your point, Sir Laurence Olivier, the famous actor, used to throw up before giving a presentation. Barbra Streisand didn't perform for years because she was so nervous. Elvis Presley also would get stage fright, and I believe it was Barbra Streisand who actually had the lyrics on the floor so she wouldn't forget them. So you're in good company if you are nervous. But here's the deal. When you are nervous about speaking, you are being self-centered. So get over yourself. It's not about you. It's about the audience. And the audience is on your side. You have a message that they want to hear, and be equal with them. Don't give them so much power.
You know, and people, before they make a presentation, especially if they don't do it a lot, they say, well, I think I'm going to memorize this. And you say, among the myths, the mistakes, don't memorize, because it's so easy to get stuck, and sometimes you got to go back and start from the very beginning to get up to that point again.
Absolutely. I say don't memorize, familiarize. Now, there are some times when you have no choice but to have a manuscript that's written word for word. That is the hardest presentation to give, and I encourage people not to do that if at all possible. What is better is to have an outline, know your bullet points or your speaking points, build in stories that you know from heart, and then Talk from your knowledge base. Be conversational. I can tell you a story about an executive I coached who was reading his slides word for word and losing credibility. And when I would talk with him, I saw that he was really knowledgeable. And I said, why are you reading this? So I told him, let that be your backdrop and just talk from what you know. So he went back, did that, and his boss said how much better, how significantly improved he was.
Well,
so familiarize, don't memorize.
Well, and so many people say, you know, you really need to start with a joke. And you say that's okay if that's your personality, but how many times have you heard somebody come up with a joke that was like really bad, maybe not even appropriate for the audience? I mean, come on, it's a group of nuns you're talking to, so that really wasn't the appropriate joke to start. And you're saying really use some discretion. You don't always have to start with a joke.
No, that's a myth. You don't have to start with a joke. And if you are going to start with a joke, you need to be a very good joke teller, because unless you have good timing, it can bomb, as you said, and then you're starting on a low point. So humor is good. Humor is different from a joke. A joke has a punchline. So use humor, but if you're not good with humor, if you are humor challenged, then don't do it. You don't have to start with something funny.
And here's another one that people say all the time. I'm speaking, what do I do with my hands? Do I use my hands? Do I not use my hands? And you've talked about both extremes in the book, Knockout Presentations, where some people like hide their hands behind their back like they don't have any, which is a little awkward.
Yeah, or they lock them in front, what we call the fig leaf position.
Yes.
Or they twiddle their thumb, or at meetings they're playing with a paper clip or a pen. The goal with hands is this. Your power space is between your waist and your face. So you want to concentrate your energy or your movement above the waist. That's why when I work with people and show them what visual confidence looks like, we get their gestures waist high. As soon as you bring your hands above the waist, you will be perceived as confident. Then from there, use hand motions. You can contrast and compare with different arms. You can tick off or count off on your fingers if you have a number of points on an agenda. You will look confident when you do that.
You know, and it's interesting too, and you mentioned the confidence, and one thing you talk about, in fact, it's the number one mistake people make, it's lack of preparation. Does confidence equal preparation? The more prepared you are, the more confident you are in the presentation you're about to make, and the more successful you will be.
Definitely, and I always tell people it's 90% preparation and only 10% delivery. And this is one of the biggest mistakes. People don't put enough time, and I'm talking even at the executive level. They may have someone who puts their presentation together, and then they read it on the plane. They go through their slides quickly. And I had one executive say to me, you know, you're a good coach, Diane. I'm not saying that, but you know what I really value? The fact that I have an appointment because it forces me to practice. Before that, he wasn't doing it, and it made such a difference in his presentation and the way he was being perceived.
You're listening to This Week in America on the Blue Funk Broadcasting Radio Network, website thisweekinamerica.us. Our guest on the program, Diane DiResta. Knockout Presentations, her book, How to Deliver Your Message with Power, Punch, and Pizzazz. Her website is diresta.com, diresta.com. Log on to our website and you can link up and get all the information. It's interesting because you talk about everything is communication. We tend to think communication is verbal. In fact, you're grading visual, vocal, and verbal is like the smallest percentage out of the three.
And people are always surprised when they hear that. And I don't mean to dismiss the content. Obviously, if you have content-free presentations, there's no value. But here's what one study said. It said that, this was a professor from UCLA, in one-to-one social communication, the visual message was 55%. The voice was 38% of the message, and the words were only 7%. So here's what it says to me. If you're nervous or something goes out of sync and you're giving a double message, people get confused, and then they start to believe the body. So your words can say one thing, such as, this is going to be our best year yet. And if you say it with your eyes downcast and you're twiddling your thumbs and you're speaking in a monotone, guess what? That's not the message that comes across, just the opposite.
You can have a great presentation, and because of body language and inflection, you lose them.
Absolutely. In fact, that's why what's very interesting, on one of the TV stations, they were hiring a body language expert, and during the presidential elections, she was analyzing the body language.
Yes.
And it's very interesting because that's where the true message really is.
Another part of communication that most people probably don't think about, and it's very important, is listening.
Mm-hmm. I say that listening is the other side of speaking, and that's why I wrote a whole chapter on listening in a public speaking book. People think that when they're giving a speech, they're not listening because it's one way, but it actually is not one-way communication. Anytime you're in front of an audience, there is an exchange of energy. There is a nonverbal communication that's going on back and forth, and the best speakers tune into that. They're present in the moment, and they are adjusting and making these fine adjustments to what they see and hear. They're looking at body language, they're looking at facial expression, they're listening to how the audience listens. And here's something interesting. Rodgers and Hammerstein, when they wrote The King and I, originally they didn't have any romance between the king and Anna. And they listened to the first rehearsal, and they listened to the audience listened, and they could sense that there was a restlessness. They wanted something between the king and Anna, and that night they penned that song, Can We Dance, or Shall We Dance?
Right.
So it's really key to listen to your audience.
Well, and it's amazing because as you're making a presentation and talking to people, if you look at them and sense their, like you said, their body language, you can almost tell whether, okay, this is really going over well, or whoops, midstream adjustment here because this doesn't seem to be working.
Yes, well, if you hear a lot of throat clearing and a lot of rustling, and then suddenly people are on their BlackBerries, there's a good chance that you have disengaged them in some way, and then you need to do something different.
We've got just a couple minutes left on the program. Diane DiResta, author of the book Knockout Presentations, How to Deliver Your Message with Power, Punch, and Pizzazz, our guest on This Week in America. Something that's really interesting, and I want to find out your impression on this. Social media is wonderful, except what impact does that make on communication? Does it lead to bad habits?
It makes a great impact. Right now it's very hot, and it's a part of your branding. Now it's not verbal, or it's not vocal. It's only verbal and written, but what you say can be perceived because of the tone. So you want to be careful about the tone that you use. You want to be careful of the messaging and what you're trying to accomplish. So I actually wrote an article, 7 Social Media Mistakes, and related it to some of the mistakes of public speaking. And one of them, again, is not having a purpose or a strategy, not being prepared, not knowing your audience, and giving the same message in the same way to everybody and not thinking about why you're doing that, and not worrying about your image. If you're projecting the wrong image, you may be talking about drinking over the weekend, and meanwhile you have clients who are reading that. So you want to be very careful when you're using social media. It is a presentation.
Well, it's interesting too, as you're talking, first impressions are important, and you point out it, got 7-10 seconds to make that first impression, but we really don't consider that when we walk up on stage, and I think we've all been guilty of that. We sort of rush up, ready to get started, and we really don't take the time to make ourselves comfortable, the audience comfortable, And when the speech is over, we have a tendency to run off, and really those impressions are important.
Exactly. You want to have a very strong opening and a strong closing, and you want to have a strong walk-on. And I spend time with people developing their presence on the platform. And presence on the platform could be your presence sitting down at a meeting, but there is a demeanor, a technique for managing that, for being present, for getting the audience ready, for owning the room. It's very important to command a room. And I have to say that if you're not speaking with power and confidence, you're actually leaving money on the table, because people who have good presentation skills get better jobs, they get promoted more often, they make more sales, and they get more business.
There is a correlation between your communication skills and your success. The book is excellent. You say there are two equalizers in life, money and public speaking. If you get public speaking down, you got a chance at making more money.
Exactly.
The book is excellent. Knockout presentations.
Thank you.
How to deliver your message with power, punch, and pizzazz. Diane DiResta, the guest on This Week in America. Her website, DiResta, DIRSTA.com. You're listening to This Week in America.